Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. It's time to review an album, Tom.
Darn right.
An album that came out recently, I think last week, and has been compared to other artists such as Bon Iver, Justin Vernon, and James Blake. Both hugely popular artists in the first 4 years of the 2010s, and very influential on indie music in general, I would say. This artist that we're going to review today, though, in that same vein, is James Vincent McMorrow. This is his second record, post-tropical, and this guy is Irish, which actually we didn't know, because you can't really tell from his vocals, which are just fantastic. Let's just get, I mean, really it really is. His voice reminds me a lot of James Blake, that neo soul.
Even like How to Dress Well.
Absolutely.
Kind of like a falsetto R&B at times, but the music backing it doesn't necessarily match that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the depth that his voice shows, like he at times on post-tropical, he gets he lets his more baritone vocals come out, and he can really pack a wallop if he needs to. But really, it's that raspy sweetness of his falsetto that I think just initially just is what's attractive about this sound. Definitely.
Now, Tom, post-tropical was not. This doesn't sound like his first album. His first album, kind of like Bon Iver, was much more acoustic. It was just singer-songwriter. It was just a guy with an acoustic guitar pouring his heart out, writing sentimental tunes. And that was in 2010. So 4 years have passed. He's now writing much more, I would say, mature or even advanced compositions. Yeah,
the instrumental palette has really been expanded. Not only that, but also the song structures. The songwriting style is a lot more progressive. You get several songs that feel like they have kind of different movements. There's instruments that kind of come in and out of the mix. They don't exactly occupy the entire scope of the song. And that makes for a much more engaging listen, I think. And now there's definitely something to be said about that straightforward singer-songwriter acoustic sound, but I always like to see when people try to grow with that a little bit without completely sacrificing the emotional core that makes acoustic singer-songwriter music so attractive.
Yeah, so what part of the sound, I mean, how did he shift it from the acoustic sound? I mean, when I hear this, I hear a lot of subtle piano in there, but there's a lot of electronic melodies and guitar melodies in there too.
There's also a lot of percussion throughout this album. I think that the beats are quite the focus. You were just pointing out to me before we turned the camera on the track Glacier, how there's kind of an oscillating, like back and forth hand clap and snare drum kind of conversation almost in the rhythm. And there's a lot of stuff like that, and a lot of kind of sound samples that he's using to construct these beats to drive the songs along. And that's certainly kind of the biggest difference to me. And it was also something that was a bit of an obstacle for me, because at first, when I'm just hearing an album for the first one or two times and I'm focusing more on the sound than the songwriting, it kind of bothered me, because I thought that some of the sounds were kind of cheap, especially like the hand claps. It just I just felt like someone was just hitting a button on a Casio keyboard, and it killed me a little bit. Now, it didn't bother me quite as much by the time I listened to it like 5 times or so, because I got to know the songwriting a little more, and then that became my focus, and the melodies and the construction I could appreciate a little more. But I think that's something that people are going to be a bit divided on, and I know that we are a little divided on that as well.
Yeah, and we can get into that in a bit. I think that it's better to look at that on a track-by-track basis, because that's a good point. I really do think that this album was a challenge for me too. Now, I'll just come out and say, I've ended up coming up on this album pretty significantly. I remember when we first started listening to this last week, I listened to this like the first 3 times I listened to this record, I was like, yeah, this is cool. This is very emotional, I could tell. Very nice sounding, aesthetically pleasing, indie rock, indie pop, indie soul, whatever the heck you want to call what James Vincent McMorrow is doing. I just found that he didn't give me a sense of warmth. He didn't give me a reason to fall in love with this instantaneously. And this album, Post-Tropical, is not an album that's going to whack you on the back of your head with a baseball bat. This album is all about subtleties. And that is how McMorrow has designed his sound and created this composition that where your initial hook is the vocals. And that's where I get hooked up. And from our previous discussions into why we like Radiohead.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, I am always, my first entry point to music, for whatever reason, even though I don't really care how the vocals sound, is what the vocals are what gives me that emotional high, right? So I'm hearing this guy go, the vocals come off, even though they're beautiful, they come off super emotional. And I'm going, I have no idea why you feel this way, dude. and so it was really hard to relate at first.
Yeah.
Now, once I got past that and I got into all of the design and the sound, how, like, when he creates these, you know, percussive, really percussive based movements, and he puts piano and maybe a little bit of guitar, very light electric guitar melody, or like glitchy electronic melody in there, and I feel like that that sort of just brilliant undertone of the sound really balances out the emotion. Once I understood what he was doing there, I started to fall in love with these tracks. It's like it started coming out, and it's all about those little melodies that just creep out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
So, first of all, Cavalier, the opener, I think that track does a really good job of setting the stage. Now, but for me, I didn't really open up to this album until I realized how absolutely brilliant that the track Red Dust, track 3, is. This has to be one of the best songs I've heard in a long time. I mean, just the way that this thing just kind of opens up at the end and just progresses throughout it. It is super emotional without being overly emotional. And that is power in songwriting. I mean, this guy, his lyrical composition, the way he designed the sound, the way presents his vocals are just, he's so softly putting it out there, but yet it just resonates with you. It's a brilliant song, and I think that was kind of the codex for me. And that song in turn also does have that clap.
It does have that hand clap, and it killed me. It killed me at first because I'm very much about how the sound is coming together to construct that. You know, you mentioned too. I think that's a big differentiating factor between the two of us, and once again, why you probably like this album a little bit more than I did is the vocals kind of being the highlight. I tended to focus more on the instrumentals, and while I thought they were really well written, I didn't feel like they were always presented in a way that was able to sum up the emotional response he was going for. But I also think that you hit on something very important there when you were saying that he doesn't oversell it. He doesn't go overboard, and I think that's really important because if he did, it might make it a little easier to get into at first, but it probably would wear on listeners a little more.
I totally agree
I
with
think that it has a much more lasting impact because it lets you ease into it, adjust to it, and connect to it in your own way. And I found that was my experience with this. At first, I had a very big kind of who cares factor when I was listening to this album. Like, yeah, I could tell that he's performing it well and the songs are well written, but I just didn't really care. And I started to get over that, and I started to really connect with some of these songs. Another thing that I want to point out he's doing very well is just theming. I mean, obviously this album has a lot to do with love and heartbreak and those kind of classical emotional themes.
Singer-songwriter.
Yeah, exactly. But he matches it up with these very earthy imagery. I mean, even just from the album artwork to the title, Post-Tropical, you got tracks like The Lakes, Red Dust, Gold, Post-Tropical, Glacier, Outside Digging. I mean, very earthy names. And it really creates a good flow to the album and kind of a theme. I don't know, to me when I'm listening to it, it almost like it matches up, like there's a juxtaposition of the life cycle of a relationship with like the life cycle of the earth.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It totally does. And you know, to further on that point, I think that the theming also helps the cohesive listening experience too, because you have this sense that all these songs operate within the same sonic umbrella, right? There's a lot of there's not a lot of change. I mean, while there's a good variety, it's interesting how he was able to achieve a sense of really good variety in his songwriting and still have that same sonic motif throughout all the songs. I mean, I think that this album does a great job of building throughout. I mean, tracks 8 and 9, Post-Tropical and Glacier, those two tracks are very powerful, probably at least from an intensity standpoint, the most intense part of the album, climactic point of the album. And he was just so wise to put those towards the end and then allow like Glacier and Outside Digging especially to kind of end the album out. It just makes for a great straight through listen. Now, track 4, Gold, I actually did have a problem with with the songwriting in that song. There's just something about the horns and the choral vocals and how it was produced and the percussion, and it just gets all washed out in the high end. It just doesn't sound balanced to me, and it's really hard for that melody to come out. Now, that's one of the catchiest choruses on the entire record, so I know a lot of people are loving that track, which is great, actually, and it just goes to show how talented this guy is at writing good vocal parts. I mean, this guy really does have it all. Do I think this is a masterpiece? No. I do, however, think this is a great album, and I'm going to keep coming back to tracks like Red Dust, Lookout, Post-Tropical Glacier for the rest of the year. I'm excited about this record, and it was just fun because it kind of grew on me over the course of the week.
What are you going to give it?
I think I'm going to go 83.
I'm going to go 79.
Cool. Another thing I want to point out real quick.
Yeah.
This is getting a lot of comparison to Bon Iver just because of how McMorrow has transformed between that acoustic singer-songwriter and a bigger, on his second record now, having a bigger, more fleshed-out record. And I struggled with that a bit because that's exactly what Bon Iver did, but with his two records, with Justin Vernon's two records. And I just feel like they're offering two different things here.
Experiences. I totally agree.
This is a whole nother perspective that I think you have to take into account. So I was able to keep them separated. I don't know if other people are. I don't know if you had the same experience or not.
Yeah, I was trying not to let that really leak into my listening experience much. I think that they are very different experiences, but there are some similarities in sound that are unavoidable.
What did you guys think about Post-Tropical? Let us know at www.velocitiesandmusic.com and youtube.com/velocitiesandmusic. As always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and let us know what albums you'd like to see us review on this channel. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.